I don't know why, but I think you'll get a kick out of the sermon. I think it's pretty funny. And I hope it'll be good too. I hope. Yeah, lots of pictures from the past. These are all these kids. Yeah. Welcome. All of a sudden, it just sort of starts, right? Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a few weeks from Christmas. We just finished Hanukkah, and we got a number of things going on. One, not the most important, but I'd ask you to honor Gabby at the desk. Wear a mask if you're anywhere near the office. She's pregnant, which I announced last week, and she's not getting her booster, so just be careful around her and honor her space. This week we have the Senior Covenant Group meeting. We have shortly, right after church, we're having a congregational meeting. That's really the big announcement. If you could stay, and we're going to talk about the budget, sort of where we're at. It's kind of, in the way I think of this congregational meeting, it's a mandatory one, not for you, but for the church to host. And it's kind of it's sort of a mid-semester, it's a halftime break to see where we're at. Pledges, probably a little bit of forecasting into the future, kind of a review where we are. So if you are interested in church life, it's a good chance to pause. We're still collecting stuff for Rainbow Services. I will make a run in the middle of the week. We don't have enough time to get it to them. It's the 15th that it's due by, so I'll probably drop off stuff at the last minute, but probably today. So if you want to have food or gifts, that's fine. Let's see, we're going to have a little quick meeting after church for those who, there was a good dozen people in the regarding Afghan refugees and support of them. I've had a conversation with this Orange Coast Church, and maybe we'll collaborate with the Long Beach Church, but we're going to have a quick meeting before the congregational meeting starts, just to kind of keep our energy up around that and clarify what we've learned. Next Sunday after church is New Member Sunday, so if you're new and you want to, possibly become a member. That's mostly what it's for, but it's also for anyone who wishes to just sort of have a conversation about Unitarian Universalism and represent the church. Our membership team will be here. Sue Cutler in the house. Woo! How about that? Christmas Eve is 5 o'clock. And if I need to tell you what date Christmas Eve is, can I tell you? There's a pagan meeting somewhere for you. I don't know. Let's see. We have all of those things and more. And how about that? I'm going to invite Leanne up, and she and I are going to do a responsive reading, but you're going to join us. We just wanted to have someone on the microphone, which would be me, because otherwise on the recording it's invisible. So Leanne, come join me here.
Good morning. You get to do all the work. This place has been waiting for us.
To gather our dreams of justice and peace.
This place has been waiting for us.
To honor it by opening our hearts and speaking our minds.
This place has been waiting for us.
To fill it with compassion and loving kindness.
This place has been waiting for us.
To draw from us a breath of common purpose.
This place has been waiting for us.
To listen to the wisdom of silence.
This place has been waiting for us.
To make it sacred from our coming together. Did I miss something? Oh. Cut my pay. To fill it with urgency of new possibilities. All right. How about that? Thanks to Leanne and Gary, and I suppose me, for decorating, and for Kim, who put, if you get a chance to come up here, there's a lot of our teens and RE kids. She put a thing called the PUC family tree, and there's a lot of cool photos up here. So if you get a chance to take a peek at that, that would be great. So the service today is about Dickens, who was a Unitarian, sort of, kind of, maybe. Doesn't matter, but we're going to pretend it does. Today, with a very stupid question of whether he was a UU or an Anglican, we proceed. We're going to look and see exactly what the theology of his social gospel and how it connected with Unitarianism and now, to some degree. And how did his relationship with the Unitarian Church shape him, which it did certainly to some degree. That's our topic for today. And we begin with our opening hymn, Now Let Us Sing, 368. Now let us sing. Join in to the degree that you're comfortable.
Sing to the power of the faith within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within. Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the faith within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within. Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the hope within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the love within. Sing to the power of the love within. Lift up your voice, be unafraid. Sing to the power of the love within. Sing to the power of the joy within. Sing to the power of the joy within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the joy within.
like to invite our kids down for our children's moment and talk about Dickens himself. Come on down. One of us might not like this one. It's kind of anti-capitalistic. So Charles Dickens, do you know anything about him? Yeah, he did that. Say it again.
He wrote the Christmas Carol?
He did. Oh, I'm going to sit over here. We're trying to figure out whether I should stand in front of you and hover over the kids ominously, or I should turn, and we're working on that. So come on around. We'll try it this way. There we go. So part of the reasons that Dickens' stories were so powerful, he was one of the first writers to basically add the quirks and imperfections of people. He wrote about common people more than anything else, and he wrote about quirky characters like that he picked apart from his real life. Before that, there was less of that. How's that? People wrote about kings and queens and stuff. I mean, it's overstated, but that's kind of true. And Dickens lived through right at the heart of the Industrial Revolution when things were pretty rough. Huh?
Oh, Victorian era.
Yeah, and even a little bit before that. And so he had, this is a little children's story. He advocated for the poor a lot. It was one of his things. And he had a moment that is in this book that I'm going to talk about, and I don't want to blow the punchline. So here we are. They'll be able to watch. They'll be able to follow along up at the start. So London, we think of London as sort of a bad weather town, right? It's kind of foggy a lot, and it's rainy, and it's raw. I think that's the way that we talk about London. There's nice days, too. And he would spend time down by the river with kids, like looking for scraps of wood and collecting little bits of metal and copper that they could sell. A lot of poor people in London at the time. And Dickens was hungry, but there, of course, were different levels of wealth. And there were boys that had new books and were going to school, and he was sort of jealous of them. His family had to pawn his books to survive. They were very poor. And he would sort of, naturally wish that he could be like some of the other well-off kids. And I gotta keep up here. I'm losing my, all right, there we are. So, yeah, you can, well, no, I need to see the back. So, here we go. I got it. Thank you, Kim. So he goes to this Warren's leather blackening shop, and there you see him also. He's packing bottles here. That was one of his jobs. He was very good at it. And he was such a good storyteller because he lived in his fictional world, right? Like a lot of people do, a lot of people who are good writers do. And he was telling the kids stories, and they were like, oh, keep telling your stories. But the mean sort of foreman said, silence, and sent them back to work. So, in Dickens' times, he's walking out from work. There's vendors all around. It's kind of a gritty city. He didn't have any money, so he went home. He had a little bedroom up in an attic. You can see him up in the window there. And he would sort of sit and write stories, started to write his stories. And then he fell asleep, but he would sort of begin. That was the first time when he was like kind of a teenager, like really kind of around your age, that he sort of started to write things down. And he falls asleep, and the next day he went to see his family was in debtor's prison. They had a thing called debtor's prison. And he was in debt to the baker. I mean, no doubt you fall into debt when you need to feed your family bread. So he goes to see the family in debtor's prison. And it's kind of a miserable horror show. It's cold, of course. It's sort of in the winter. And then eventually, Charles is, he's a fast worker. So people would come to watch him work when he did his stuff at the bottle shop. And eventually, the family got liberated from prison. And his dad worked hard to sort of get him into a school system. So Charles gets off to go to school, and then in the end, we see Charles in the last frame as an adult, even as an older, there he is at school, walking in for the first time. And then we see Charles as an established writer and sort of advocate for the poor. He also left his family with a lot of kids and his wife, so he wasn't necessarily the best husband of all time, but He always advocated for his, for the, downtrodden in a fictional way, not so much in a political way, but in his writing, he sort of always lifted up people's stories. So he's not a perfect character, but, better than some. And Charles always kept some of that childhood secret, so it's not necessarily, he didn't write specifically about his childhood, but that's Charles Dickens, and he was, at times in his life, a Unitarian, so we're kind of proud of that. And he was born an Anglican, and he died and was buried in an Anglican church, but in the middle, he went to a Unitarian church. So we claim him. That's how we do it. That's how we work. So if anybody was a Unitarian for any amount of time, like if you become famous, you're a Unitarian. That's the moral of the story. So let's sing out our kids
Go now in peace.
to go work in the bottle
now
shop.
in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
We're going to join in our centering hymn, Meditation on Breathing, 1009. I love this. This is a great song.
When I breathe in, I breathe in peace.
When I breathe out,
I
breathe out love. When I breathe in,
I breathe in
peace. When
I
I
breathe out, I breathe out love.
breathe in,
I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love.
when I breathe in,
I breathe
in peace. And when I breathe out,
I breathe
out love.
We could do that all day, I think. So, time for joys and concerns, and of course, I have a new packet of cleaning wipes that I have not opened. Dan's lighting it. Dan's in the house. Alan.
All's well, mostly.
Okay. This is you're going to dig this prayer. I hope. Arizona's first secular blessing came, I found this, I think it's about 7 or 8 years ago, if I remember correctly. Juan Mendez was a 28-year-old Democratic state representative from Tempe, Arizona. He delivered the following invocation or prayer to the Arizona Congress. It was the first such blessing in that state's history not to invoke God. A friend of mine recently sent this to me. He didn't include the date. I stuck it in this word file for Dickens because I thought Dickens would appreciate this. Mendez begins. Most prayers in this room begin with a request to bow your heads. I would like to ask you not to bow your heads. I would like to ask that you take a moment to look around the room. I invite you to do the same. At all the men and women here in this moment, he was doing this in the state Senate or Congress, sharing this extraordinary experience of being alive and dedicating ourselves to working towards improving the lives of people in our state. This is a room in which there are many challenging debates, many moments of tension, of ideological division, of frustration, but this is also a room where, as my secular humanist tradition stresses, by the very fact of being human, we have much more in common than we have differences. We share the same spectrum of potential for care, for compassion, for fear, for joy, and for love. The 28-year-old rep said, Carl Sagan once said, "For small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love." There is in the political process much to bear. In this room, he said, there is plenty of reason for compassion, for the shared love of the people of our state, for our Constitution, for our democracy, and let us root our policy-making process in these values that are relevant to all Arizonians, regardless of religious belief or non-belief. In gratitude and love, in reason and compassion, let us work together for a better Arizona. Amen. I take that calling that pulls all of us, whether you're a person of faith or not, into this room and allow us to sit with that great duty and purpose and love and just let it sit while we listen to Severin twinkle away his little magic.
So this reading comes from Charles Dickens' American Notes, a collection of thoughts he gathered on a trip to the U.S. in 1842, and here he's talking about ministers. He began, "Wherever religion is resorted to as strong drink and as an escape from the dull, monotonous round of home, those of its ministers who pepper the highest will be sure to please. They who strewn the eternal path with the greatest amount of brimstone and who most ruthlessly tread down the flowers and the leaves that grow by the wayside will be voted the most righteous. And they who enlarge with the greatest persistence on the difficulty of getting into heaven will be considered by all true believers certain of going there, though it would be hard to say by what process of reasoning this conclusion is arrived at."
I think that deserves a roar. Someone's going to have to take this toy away from me.
Right.
That's clear. When it comes to Charles Dickens, there essentially remains a permanently unfinished and incredibly unimportant scholarly debate about which religion it makes more sense to call him, Anglican or Unitarian. It's essentially a stupid debate that Dickens himself would have probably hated. In that spirit, I've decided to lift it up. I want you to imagine a reality TV show in which the cast of scholars, some believing he was more an Anglican and some believing he was more a Unitarian, live and are forced to live. Think of it as like this beautiful country English house out in the countryside filled with the kind of cameras those reality TV shows always are. And they're required to live together. This should be fun, right? It's important to mention that the Anglican Church here is the Episcopal Church in America. If you don't know that, you probably do. We pick up this show called The Ghost of Dickens, where one of the scholars who claims Charles to be an Anglican says over the kitchen island, clearly, Dickens was so enamored with Unitarians and his values that there's no doubt about it. He flirted with it, the stiffly dressed cleric says, downing a gin and tonic. To that, a more casually dressed Unitarian in a tweed jacket responds with a touch of indignation. Flirted with Unitarianism? Bloody false. Clearly, his birth and death as an Anglican was much more an expression of his family formality than it was an ideology he ever accepted or spoke about. One of those who say Dickens was a Unitarian is the Unitarian scholar Michael Timko. And he's seated over in this beautiful little hearth area in my imagination. And he says, all Dickens' novels reflect the central ideas of 19th century Unitarianism. The belief that Jesus was a human being who exemplified the truly religious life. The religion of a God dominated by stern judgment is nowhere in his work. A disdain of theological controversy rings through Dickens' works. A rejection of dogma, an inclusive rather than an exclusive spirit of religion, and an emphasis on doing good works. Timko says, if Dickens wasn't a Unitarian, I don't know who was. I imagine Timko in this reality setting, concluding his little rant, standing up indignantly saying, you can't think like a Unitarian, write like a Unitarian, join a Unitarian church and not be one. The tension in this imaginary reality show for scholars is getting hot. That's the proper response to this sermon. It's absurd. Thank you, Diana. Those who think of him an Anglican ask with disdain, just where, pray tell, are the quotes where our beloved Charles says, I'm a Unitarian? And there is silence among all of you. And then the well-coiffed English scholar walks off indignantly. I thought as much. You're all idiots. I'm going in the jacuzzi, followed by all those with half a brain not interested in putting words in Sir Charles's mouth are invited to join me there. This being a reality show, the house is absurd and everybody continues to drink. And that act of boldness leads the Unitarian scholar in Tweed to say, oh, no, you don't. You don't get to claim Sir Charles that easily, except he has a better British accent. Oh, yes, he does, says an English woman in a long wool skirt with glasses propped up on her head. Dickens says almost nothing about religion, and you know it. And what's more Anglican than not having a strong opinion about religion? Even you know that. So let me ask you, just why, if he was such a committed Unitarian, was he not more vocal about his religious transformation? If our beloved Charles was such a Unitarian, she says, slugging back the last gulp of her aged brandy, then why does he never talk about it? And if he was so committed to your heretical little faith, when the Anglican Church's beloved Dickens retired to the country in his golden years, why did he join an Anglican church? And while I'm at it, why can't you ever put your dishes in the dishwasher? One of those who wish to claim him a Unitarian, an American, pushes himself back from the counter and lifts his sunglasses. I can't believe you in your litigious tone. Sure, it's true that Charles rejoined an Anglican church when he moved to the country. And yes, it was the church of his youth. But everyone, including you, know that that choice was made pretty simple by there being no nearby Unitarian churches. And oh, by the way, having joined an Anglican church, it might be important to tell the truth that he once quickly gained disillusion and almost never went. The American walks off in a hiss. Being a stupid debate held in our time, I want you to imagine we might break for an advertisement here for Kim Kardashian's new German-themed jeans, Junkum Inum Trunkum. Sorry. When the action returns to our angry, overly educated reality home, lodged beautifully in the English countryside, the camera pans closely on the face of Mark Harris, a UU history scholar. Harris was invited to the show for including Charles Dickens in the list of the world's most 200 influential Unitarians. Harris, sitting in an armchair in the Victorian decorated living room, Harris states that although he grew up in the Church of England, it's pretty well known that he never subscribed to the doctrines. Mark Harris is holding court now. I know I'm an American, and worse, I'm a UU scholar, but I think we should stop debating about whether because Charles died a member of an Anglican church. How he died is not really the issue in life, is it? What is clear and what is much more important is his affiliation and affection with Unitarianism as being no passing matter. In fact, into the end of his life, Dickens maintained close friends with many of his Unitarian friends. And whether at his death he was formally enrolled as a member of the Unitarian Church or not, when he died in 1870, Timko jumps in to finish Harris's statement. Almost idolatrous eulogies were heard all over New England. As one Boston writer penned, every Unitarian pulpit in Boston sent him immediately to heaven. That's truly convincing, we hear a frustrated Anglican yell from the jacuzzi, one of the house's hidden cameras catching him nearly spilling his pint of hard cider into the bubbly water. He's so excited. You can tell all about how he never really adopted his core beliefs of his religion as much as Unitarian ones. You can say that, fine, bloody super, but listen to this. He slurs with a drunken excitement. Dickens was born in an Anglican home. He was baptized an Anglican. He baptized all his kids Anglican. He died an Anglican. And what's after all, he's buried in the most famous burial grounds at Westminster Abbey. Not an Anglican church, the most important Anglican church in the world. Yeah, it sounds like he was a Unitarian, all right. I can't believe I share this beautiful pastoral house with you idiots. Pretty soon you Unitarians are going to start telling me the sky isn't blue. Just then, one of the quieter members of the Dickens crowd was a Unitarian rushes into the room seemingly naked in a towel wrapped around her, nearly yelling, "All those who reject Dickens' commitment to Unitarianism probably fail to understand how costly it would have been for him, a man of such fame and status, to publicly switch his faith traditions. His publishers surely squelched any of that news." And the first, and not surprisingly last, episode of the reality show called Dickens Ghosts that aired on C-SPAN blessedly comes to an end. Fun? All right, okay. He really had very little to say directly about religion in general, other than sort of scouring the hypocrisy of it, which he did quite frequently. And there's a lot of questions about his moving loyalties. The real reality is that in the end, he probably was enough of a free thinker to never really be adhered to either one of the faiths. It might be simplest to repeat in this imaginary debate what his great-great-granddaughter Lucinda Dickens Hawsley said in her bicentennial book about her famous ancestor. That if he showed any interest in religion at all, it was in any religious moral beliefs and actions rather than its theological beliefs. Unless you're an American. And then we have something of a little bit of a trump card we haven't played yet. In 1842, when Dickens was in his early 40s, he visited America. It was the first of 2 trips he made here, although he was generally not at all impressed with most of what he saw in the relatively young country of ours. He did love Boston. Dickens praised the hub of Unitarianism, Boston, and its citizens, saying that he would want the rest of America to be just like it. While in the American city that brought life to the first half of our you tradition, he met with 3 famous Unitarians, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Andrews Norton, and he stopped to have breakfast at the home of the American Unitarians' leading figure, our founder, Channing. Dickens had read and been greatly impressed with Channing's famous 1819 sermon delivered at the ordination of Jared Sparks. Unitarians came to know this as the Baltimore Catechism, and a broadly published sermon at the time. It was called a catechism because it laid out the early principles and beliefs of the emerging movement that would become Unitarianism. It was our moment of coming out of the closet theologically to the broader world, essentially. Channing would die shortly after he and Dickens met for breakfast. Channing and Unitarianism concurred with Dickens' own thoughts. In fact, the Victorian scholar Robert Newsom said that Dickens' interest in Unitarianism was virtually the only enthusiasm he brought back to England with him. Dickens returned impressed with Unitarians' practical theology, and in particular the stance they had taken against slavery. Immediately on his return to London, Dickens begins to attend services at the Essex Street Chapel, which was a Unitarian church, as Dickens described in a letter. He said, "I've carried into effect an old idea of mine and joined the Unitarians, who would do something for human improvement if they could, and who practice charity and toleration." It was in Pilgrim's Letters. Although Dickens' first experience was at Essex Church, he eventually joined, and more specifically how they did it at the time, he bought a pew at the little Unitarian chapel on Portland Street in London. This church was led by Reverend Taggart, and Dickens met this person who would officiate the equivalent of an honorary memorial service for Channing, who he had not too long before that met. Dickens appreciated the sermon, and he had a talk with Reverend Taggart about Channing, whom, of course, he had just had breakfast with not too long ago. Reverend Taggart and Dickens bonded over their same sort of feelings towards Channing and religion. In Dickens' words, the two shared a disgust with our established church, the Anglican Church, and its daily outrages on common sense and humanity. Dickens shared with the Unitarians, who he had just joined, a shared belief in the essential worthiness of human beings. Bob, don't scream, he said that. And a critique of the theological concept that humans were essentially depraved. What Dickens called the humanitarianism of Unitarianism, phrase he said, say that 3 times fast. His close relationship with Taggart seems to be what flipped him over from being an appreciative observer to someone who became a member of a UU church. In addition to being in alliance with our Unitarian values, Like so many of us today, it seems Dickens had little respect for the dogma and hypocrisy of any church of any kind, of course, which we have even some of ourselves, of course. And he called the Catholic Church, for its dogma, a curse upon the world. Hard words. And another referred to the stables of the Christian faith, like the Christian birth, as irrational. However, even if his disdain for church doctrine, he was always sort of engaged in the issue of values. Referring to Christianity in general, he said, the church's hand is at its own throat because of its doctrinal wranglings. The various parties, more popery here, he said, more Methodism there, more forms of consignment to eternal damnation. As Dickens wrote himself in a letter in 1844, referring to Anglicanism, Methodism, Catholicism, all as isms. He kind of way ahead of us on that one. Right? That's famous. Oh, heaven for the world without an ism, he wrote. The wickedness of us moles into each other as if to have brought a comet on our head 1,000 years ago. One can find Dickens' disgust with religion, hypocrisy, and characters, if you're a real Dickens fan, Miss Jelliesby in Bleak House and Mr. Pecksniff in Martin Chuzzlewit. I've not read either of those books. Doctrinal or political theology was never important to Dickens. The truth is, he was so interested in the role that church played in society in a functional way that he basically, like I said before, evaluated whether a theology was worthwhile as to what they did. Kind of like us. The fact is, if Charles had a Facebook page and it was asked whether he was a Unitarian or Anglican, he probably would have said, it's complicated. It's probably not a coincidence that upon his return from America, he wrote A Christmas Carol. Most people don't know that. It was really immediately upon his return. And Charles Dickens' most famous novel, with, of course, Ebenezer Scrooge, was actually more influential in making Christmas what we think of it today than most of us even understand. The very idea that Christmas was both a time to think about to those who were less fortunate, which it sort of is, and a time to gather with friends and family around tables and Christmas trees more than go to church, Tim Coe suggests, in no small measure comes from the impact of A Christmas Carol. Although we may not notice it today, its impact is particularly important because when you think about Scrooge and his transformation, it's fundamentally not a religious one. Scrooge's anxiety is not that he's lost faith, is it? No, not that his insight is to be kinder, not because of a result of an encounter with Jesus. Nope. He has broken his relationship and his responsibility to his employees and his fellow citizens. A practical theology, really, isn't it? Via Scrooge, Tim Coe asks, is Dickens not really illustrating the emergent Unitarian value that people are not inherently depraved, but can cultivate their own consciences? Interesting, right? And have the internal capacity to convert themselves based on their own moral movement and sense of values? Larry Smith, a UU pastor, calls A Christmas Carol a classic expression of 19th century Unitarianism. I think he's right. In fact, after publishing his A Christmas Carol, mind you, not The Christmas Carol, but A Christmas Carol, Dickens took heat from the evangelical community for neither God or Jesus appearing in the story. Because of these positions and sentiments and reasons, it is said that he was a Unitarian. Well, this is certainly true. What's clear is he did not exhibit the same kind of commitment between his words and actions to his loved ones as he did in the political literary sphere. Dickens worked tirelessly for a wide range of charitable causes. He raised funds for soup kitchens, housing associations, for prison reform, hospitals, adult education, and even disabled artists, without ever touting himself or his new Unitarian faith. He did so in quiet ways, though. He didn't publicly support these causes as a champion of them in a way that Richard Gere does Tibet, or any other number of people. Heroes are nice, but they're also highly fallible, as we know, Dickens left his wife he had just had 10 children with for an 18-year-old, and when facing social pressure for that choice, saw fit to slander his wife as being an unfit mother and try to have her committed to an insane asylum. Not the best. To make the rich work harder, I saw on a bumper sticker one time, we pay them more. To make the poor work harder, we pay them less. Dickens would have loved and hated the irony of that bumper sticker. He lived with that. Alison Flood of the British publication The Guardian notes that Charles Dickens has been identified as the author of a number of articles in which the middle class were attacked for not supporting the people. He said that he and Dickens wrote what is thought to be him, but he wrote anonymously, that he thought that dining halls for the poor should be free of religion and free of all the kind of commitments and trying to, kind of commit people to a particular cause. He says that they should be paid respect as if they were dining in a regular hall. And another unattributed article attributed to Dickens, but not signed in his name, scholars believe he urged to get into our heads that the working man is neither a felon nor necessarily a drunkard or a very little child, as they are often treated. In Dickens' times was one of urban slums and an economy that went from rural to industrial. He sort of lived through the hardest part of that. His message was one that even the most inhumane and covetous of humanity could reflect on their condition and change, in Scrooge, of course, and in other places. I wonder if we believe him. Who is Dickens in modern-day America? The truth is, reading Dickens in our times can be something of its own haunt. Maybe that's the proper role for a Christmas carol today. He might be our Marley in a weird way. Maybe Dickens' Coast would ask us how dislocated and sort of COVID-threatened low-wage workers have to be before a Dickens is demanded to lift up their story. I wonder how we can bring more voice to the voiceless in a way that he did. Barbara Ehrenreich, right? Who does that work? There are voices out there, none as popular as Dickens ever was in his time. Should we create a national campaign and dress up kids like Tiny Tim with a signature sheet that petitions for a national living wage campaign? Good idea. They're good ideas. But Charles's sooty cheek characters helped flesh out a conversation back in the day. How would we raise issues for him today? That's the question I think we are left with. How do we tell our own stories about the travails of the machine and the technological age in this moment? It's not really a time of ragged kids in stovepipe hats, but it is a time of quickly unplanned early retirees and underemployed people in search of another job. It's a time of the growing gap between the wealthy and the not. Something Bob Ratchett would find reminiscent of. Keep your eyes peeled for who the next Dickens is. Amen. Leanne's going to join us we're going to join in a joke.
Actually, we're going to quiz our minister, who is so humorous.
I have the cheat sheet.
So Reverend Steve, if Santa and Mrs. Claus had a baby, what would it be?
A subordinate clause.
What does Santa spend his hard-earned salary on?
Jingle bills.
What goes, oh.
Santa walking backwards.
And why does Santa have so many gardens?
So he can ho, ho, ho.
And last but not least, why is our minister so happy at Christmas?
Because I know you will all be very generous in a very generous mood and be grateful in supporting our ministry of this church. Thank you, Leanne. Severin, are you cold? Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat. Please to put a penny in the old man's hat. Please to put a penny in the old man's hat. If you've got no penny, a halfpenny'll do. If you have no halfpenny, a farthing will be fine. If you have no farthing, then God bless you. Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat. Please to put a penny in the old man's hat. Please to put a penny in the old man's hat. If you've got no penny, a halfpenny'll do. If you've got no halfpenny, well, a quarter penny'll do. If you've got no quarter penny or no eighth penny, then God bless you.
The ushers are like, what are these farthings? How do I add them up? Our closing hymn is 348, Guide My Feet. Mumble along under your masks.
Guide my feet while I run this race.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet
while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
In closing, let us remember this church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences and beneath all of our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. shalom, salam, namaste, and blessed be. Now our service truly begins, or at least should.
This is from one of Shayna's favorite movies, The
Muppets Christmas Carol. With a thankful heart and an endless joy, with a growing family, every girl and boy will be nephew and niece to me. Will bring love, hope, and peace to me. Yes, and every night will end, and every day will start with a grateful prayer and a grateful heart. With an open smile, with an open door, I will bid you welcome. What is mine is yours. With a glass raised to toast your health.
Glass raised to toast your health.
And a promise to share the wealth.
Promise to share the wealth.
I will sail a friendly course, file a friendly chart on a sea of love and a thankful heart. Life is like a journey. Who knows where it ends? Yes, and if you need to know the measure of a man, you simply count his friends. With a thankful heart, with his wide awake, I do make this promise. Every step I take will be used now to sing your praise.
Used now to sing your praise.
And to beg you to share my days.
Beg you to share my day.
With a loving guarantee that even if we part, I will hold you close in a thankful heart. I will hold you close in a thankful heart.
Please don't run away too far, at least. We're going to have our congregational meeting in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Make a run to the bathroom. Talk about Afghanistan outside, the refugees. Thank you.